During my prenatal appointment, my doctor stopped the ultrasound and said, "At your age, having this baby is selfish." The cold gel was still on my stomach when Dr. Vivian Mercer pulled the ultrasound wand away from my belly and looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Not concern, not sympathy, disgust. I was lying on the exam table in a paper gown that barely covered anything, staring at the frozen image of my baby on the screen, a perfect profile with a tiny nose and fingers that looked like they were waving when she said those words. At your age, having this baby is selfish. I was 43 years old. I had been trying to get pregnant for 7 years. I had spent $127,000 on fertility treatments. I had suffered 4 miscarriages, the last one so devastating that I had needed therapy just to get out of bed in the morning. And now, 16 weeks into the only pregnancy that had ever made it past the first trimester, my doctor was calling me selfish for wanting to be a mother. The ultrasound room was small and windowless, lit by the glow of the monitor and the harsh fluorescent lights above. I remember the exact moment the shock turned into something else, something sharp and hot that started in my chest and spread outward until my hands were shaking. I asked her what she meant. She sighed like I was being difficult and said she was just being honest with me. I had been seeing Dr. Mercer for 3 months when that appointment happened. My previous OBGYN, Dr. Ramona Okafor, had retired suddenly after a cancer diagnosis, and her practice had transferred all patients to a new group called Lakewood Women's Health. Dr. Mercer was assigned to me automatically based on insurance coverage and appointment availability. Our first meeting had been brief and businesslike, a quick review of my medical history, and a confirmation of my pregnancy dates. She'd seemed competent, if not particularly warm, the kind of doctor who ran appointments like a factory line because she had too many patients and not enough time. I told myself that was fine. I didn't need a doctor to be my friend. I needed her to keep me and my baby healthy until delivery. My husband David had come with me to that first appointment, his hand wrapped around mine while we listened to the heartbeat for the first time together. He'd cried. I'd cried. Dr. Mercer had glanced at the clock and said everything looked normal for gestational age. Looking back, I should have noticed the way her eyes lingered on my chart when she saw my birth date. I should have noticed the slight pause before she said normal. But I was so happy, so relieved that this pregnancy was progressing, that I didn't want to see anything negative. The second appointment was when the comments started, though I didn't recognize them as comments at the time. Dr. Mercer mentioned that pregnancies over 40 carried higher risks and that I should prepare myself for the possibility of complications. I nodded because I knew this already. I had researched everything obsessively. I knew about the increased chances of gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, chromosomal abnormalities. I had done the genetic testing and gotten good results. I was seeing a maternal fetal medicine specialist in addition to my OB for extra monitoring. I was doing everything right. But Dr. Mercer kept bringing up my age at every visit, working it into conversations that didn't require it. When I mentioned some mild morning sickness, she said that was common but might be worse for me because of my age. When I asked about exercise recommendations, she said I should be careful because my age meant higher risk of complications. It was always my age. Never my health, which was excellent. Never my test results, which were all normal. Just my age, repeated like a warning or an accusation, until the word started to feel like a verdict. The appointment where everything changed was scheduled for a routine anatomy scan at 16 weeks. David had to work and couldn't come, so I went alone, which I would later regret more than anything. The ultrasound technician was a young woman named Jamie, who chatted pleasantly while she moved the wand across my belly, pointing out the baby's developing organs and measurements. Everything looked perfect, she said. She would send the images to Dr. Mercer for review, and then the doctor would come in to discuss results. I lay there on the table feeling happy and peaceful for maybe the last time in that pregnancy. When Dr. Mercer came in, Jamie left the room. The door closed with a soft click. Dr. Mercer sat down on the rolling stool and pulled the ultrasound machine back toward her, pressing the wand to my stomach again without asking if I wanted to see more images. She stared at the screen for a long time. The baby was moving around, that beautiful flutter I had just started feeling from the inside. Then she stopped the scan and said those words, and the world I had built so carefully over 7 years began to crack. I asked her to explain what she meant by selfish. I remember my voice was very calm, the kind of calm that comes right before you either scream or cry. Dr. Mercer turned to face me with the ultrasound wand still in her hand, her expression somewhere between pity and impatience. She said that women my age often didn't consider the burden they were placing on the healthcare system by pursuing high-risk pregnancies. She said that older mothers were more likely to have complicated deliveries, more likely to require intervention, more likely to have children with developmental issues. She said she had seen too many women like me, desperate to be mothers without thinking about whether they should be mothers. I asked her if she was suggesting I terminate my pregnancy. She said she was just presenting information, that it wasn't too late to make a different choice, that I should think about what kind of quality of life my child would have with an elderly mother. Elderly. She used that word. I was 43, not 73. I was healthy. My pregnancy was progressing normally, and my doctor was telling me to abort my baby because she thought I was too old to deserve one. I don't remember getting off the exam table or getting dressed. The next clear memory I have is sitting in my car in the parking garage, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white, tears streaming down my face while I tried to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to believe I had misunderstood. Part of me wanted to go back inside and ask Dr. Mercer to clarify, to give her a chance to explain that she hadn't meant what I thought she meant. But I kept hearing her words in my head, over and over. Selfish, elderly, different choice. There was no misunderstanding those. I called David from the parking garage and could barely get the words out through my crying. He wanted to come get me. He wanted to drive to the clinic and confront Dr. Mercer himself. I told him to wait, that I needed to think, that I would come home and we would figure out what to do together. The drive home was a blur. I kept one hand on my belly the whole time, feeling for movement, terrified that somehow the baby could sense what had happened and would give up on me the way everyone else seemed to want me to. David was waiting in the driveway when I got home. He held me while I told him everything. Then he held me while I cried some more. Then he made me tea and sat next to me on the couch while we tried to figure out our next steps. The first thing we agreed on was that I needed a new doctor immediately. I couldn't go back to Dr. Mercer. I couldn't let her anywhere near me or my baby again. David started searching for other OBGYNs in our network while I called the office to request my medical records and schedule transfer of care. The receptionist who answered was a woman I had never spoken to before, and when I explained that I wanted to transfer to a different provider, she asked why in a tone that suggested this was unusual. I told her I had concerns about Dr. Mercer's treatment of me. There was a long pause. Then she said she would process the records request and it would take 3 to 5 business days. She didn't ask for details about my concerns. She didn't offer to connect me with a patient advocate. She just ended the call and left me sitting there with a dial tone. The records arrived by mail 6 days later. I opened the envelope at the kitchen table while David watched, pulling out a thick stack of papers that documented every appointment, every test, every note Dr. Mercer had written about my care. Most of it was routine medical information, vital signs and test results, and standard observations. But then I got to the notes from my 16-week appointment, the one where she had told me I was selfish, and my blood went cold. The notes said nothing about what she had actually said to me. Instead, they documented that I had expressed concerns about continuing my pregnancy and requested information about termination options. They said I had been emotionally unstable during the appointment and had difficulty understanding the routine information provided. They said Dr. Mercer had offered supportive counseling and resources for pregnant women experiencing ambivalence. It was a complete fabrication, a lie, written in official medical language and signed with her credentials. She had documented the exact opposite of what had happened, and if I tried to file a complaint, those records would be the first thing anyone looked at. I called Lakewood Women's Health immediately and asked to speak with the office manager. A woman named Diane Goodwin came on the line after a 5-minute hold. I explained that Dr. Mercer's notes from my last appointment were inaccurate and asked how to request a correction. Diane's voice shifted from professional to cautious as I spoke. She said all medical documentation had to be made by the treating physician and that she couldn't modify records. I said I wasn't asking for modification, I was asking for correction of false information. She said she would need to speak with Dr. Mercer about my concerns and get back to me. She never got back to me. I called twice more over the next week and was told Diane was unavailable or in a meeting. When I finally reached her again, she said she had reviewed the situation with Dr. Mercer and the documentation was accurate. She suggested that perhaps my memory of the appointment had been affected by emotional distress and recommended I speak with a mental health professional. She was gaslighting me. The entire practice was closing ranks around Dr. Mercer and making me look like the problem. My new OB/GYN was Dr. Angela Price, a maternal-fetal medicine specialist recommended by a friend who had also experienced a high-risk pregnancy in her 40s. Dr. Price was everything Dr. Mercer wasn't: warm, thorough, and completely unbothered by my age. At our first appointment, she reviewed my medical history and test results and told me I was doing great. She said women over 40 had healthy pregnancies all the time and that my numbers looked excellent. She asked about my care transfer and I told her a brief version of what had happened. Her face changed as I spoke, shifting from friendly professionalism to something harder. She asked if I had documentation of what Dr. Mercer had said. I said I didn't, that it had been a private conversation in the exam room with no witnesses. Dr. Price nodded slowly and said something that surprised me. She said I wasn't the first patient to transfer from Dr. Mercer's care with concerns about inappropriate comments regarding age. She said she couldn't tell me details because of patient confidentiality, but that I should consider filing a formal complaint with the state medical board. Filing a complaint seemed overwhelming when Dr. Price first suggested it. I was exhausted and pregnant and just wanted to focus on staying healthy for my baby. But I couldn't stop thinking about those falsified medical records, sitting in some file somewhere, telling a story that wasn't true. I couldn't stop thinking about the other patients Dr. Price had mentioned, the other women who had transferred away from Dr. Mercer with similar concerns. How many of us were there? And what happened to the ones who didn't have the resources or support to leave? David and I talked about it every night for a week. He thought I should file the complaint immediately. He was angry in a way I had never seen him, this quiet, contained fury that made him research medical board procedures and malpractice law late into the night while I tried to sleep. Finally, I agreed to at least explore my options. I started by documenting everything I could remember about the appointment: date, time, what was said, the exact words I could recall. Then I pulled out the medical records and highlighted every inaccuracy. By the end of the process, I had 12 pages of notes detailing the discrepancies between what had happened and what Dr. Mercer had documented. The state medical board complaint process was more complicated than I expected. I had to fill out a detailed form describing the incident, provide copies of my medical records, and sign releases allowing the board to investigate. The form asked for witness statements, which I didn't have, and for any other documentation supporting my complaint. All I had was my word against Dr. Mercer's, and she had official medical records backing up her version. I submitted the complaint anyway on October 15th and received a confirmation letter saying the board would review the matter and contact me if additional information was needed. They said investigations could take 6 to 12 months. 6 to 12 months. My baby would be born before I even knew if anyone was taking my complaint seriously. The next few weeks were a strange kind of limbo. I had good prenatal care now with Dr. Price. My pregnancy was progressing well, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished, that Dr. Mercer was still out there seeing patients and saying who knows what to other women who didn't fit her idea of acceptable motherhood. The first sign that my complaint might have teeth came in early December, 3 weeks after I filed it. I received a call from a woman named Patricia Kowalski who identified herself as an investigator for the state medical board. She had been assigned to my case and wanted to schedule an interview. We met at a coffee shop near my house because I didn't want to go to an official building or feel like I was being interrogated. Patricia was in her late 50s with gray-streaked hair and reading glasses she kept pushing up her nose. She had a calm, methodical way of asking questions that made me feel like she actually wanted to understand what happened, rather than just checking boxes on a form. I told her everything, starting from my first appointment with Dr. Mercer and ending with the falsified medical records. She took detailed notes. When I finished, she looked up at me and said something I wasn't expecting. She said mine was the 4th complaint she had received about Dr. Mercer in the past 18 months. The 4th. That meant at least 3 other women had gone through something similar enough that they had filed formal complaints with the medical board. Patricia couldn't tell me details about the other complaints, but she said she could tell me that they involved similar concerns about Dr. Mercer's treatment of patients based on age or other personal characteristics. She said the board took these patterns seriously, and that having multiple complaints increased the likelihood of a thorough investigation. She asked if I would be willing to provide additional documentation or testimony if needed. I said yes, absolutely. Whatever would help. She also asked if I had considered consulting with a medical malpractice attorney. I hadn't really thought about a lawsuit because I hadn't been physically harmed, my pregnancy was fine, and I had gotten away from Dr. Mercer before anything worse happened. But Patricia explained that emotional distress was a real harm and that falsifying medical records was a serious offense that could have legal consequences beyond the medical board's jurisdiction. She gave me the name of an attorney who specialized in medical malpractice and said it might be worth a consultation. The attorney's name was Franklin Oyalaran, and his office was in a converted Victorian house downtown with creaky floors and framed diplomas covering the walls. He had been practicing medical malpractice law for 22 years and had a reputation for taking on difficult cases against large healthcare systems. When I sat down in his office and started telling him my story, he listened without interruption for almost 45 minutes. Then he leaned back in his chair and said I might have a stronger case than I realized. The falsified medical records were the key, he explained. Even if Dr. Mercer's comments were a he-said-she-said situation, deliberately documenting false information in a patient's chart was a clear violation of medical ethics and state law. If we could prove she had done this systematically, not just to me but to other patients, we could potentially pursue claims for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He asked for copies of everything I had, my notes, the medical records, the complaint to the medical board, and said he would review them and get back to me within a week. Franklin called me 5 days later with news that changed everything. He had done some preliminary research and discovered that Lakewood Women's Health had settled 2 other cases involving Dr. Mercer in the past 3 years, both sealed with confidentiality agreements. He couldn't tell me what the cases were about, but the fact that there had been settlements suggested a pattern of problematic behavior that the practice was aware of and trying to hide. He also told me that he had spoken with another attorney who was representing one of the other women who had filed a medical board complaint against Dr. Mercer. That attorney was interested in potentially combining forces if I was willing. The more plaintiffs, the stronger the case. I said I was willing. I said I was more than willing. For the first time since that horrible appointment, I felt like I might actually be able to do something beyond just escaping Dr. Mercer's care. I might be able to stop her from doing this to anyone else. The next few months were a blur of legal procedures, medical board processes, and pregnancy milestones that happened simultaneously. My belly grew while I gave depositions. I felt my baby's first strong kicks while reviewing evidence packages. I had to pause a conference call with Franklin to throw up from morning sickness that had extended into my second trimester. It was exhausting and stressful, and Dr. Price had to put me on modified bed rest at 30 weeks because my blood pressure started creeping up. She said the stress wasn't good for me or the baby. I knew she was right, but I couldn't stop now. Too many other women were counting on this going forward. By that point, we had 5 plaintiffs in what Franklin was calling a class action. 5 women who had all been patients of Dr. Mercer and who had all experienced some form of discrimination or mistreatment based on their age or reproductive choices. One woman had been told at 41 that she was delusional for thinking she could have a healthy pregnancy. Another had been pressured repeatedly to terminate a wanted pregnancy because of inconclusive genetic testing. A third had her medical records falsified in a way that made her look mentally unstable. The patterns were undeniable. The evidence phase of the lawsuit uncovered things that were even worse than what we had experienced directly. Franklin's investigators obtained internal communications from Lakewood Women's Health, showing that Dr. Mercer had a documented history of complaints going back 8 years. The practice had addressed these complaints internally with verbal warnings and sensitivity training, but had never reported them to the medical board as required by state law. They had essentially hidden her behavior to protect their reputation and avoid liability. More damaging still were emails between Dr. Mercer and the practice's medical director, a man named Dr. Gordon Newberry, discussing how to handle patient complaints. In one email, Dr. Newberry referred to older pregnant patients as geriatric fertility seekers and suggested they required more aggressive counseling to set realistic expectations. In another, he praised Dr. Mercer for being willing to have difficult conversations that other providers avoided. They weren't just aware of her behavior, they endorsed it as a practice philosophy. They had created an environment where discriminating against older patients was considered good medicine. My daughter was born on April 3rd at 5:47 in the morning after 12 hours of labor that went exactly as planned. She was 7 pounds, 4 ounces, perfectly healthy, with a full head of dark hair and her father's eyes. I held her in my arms and cried harder than I had ever cried in my life, not from sadness, but from relief and joy, and the overwhelming weight of everything it had taken to get here. David cut the cord. Dr. Price smiled from behind her surgical mask and said, "Congratulations, Mama." For a few hours, I forgot about the lawsuit and the medical board and Dr. Mercer. There was only this tiny, perfect person who had fought just as hard as I had to be here. We named her Eleanor, after my grandmother, a woman who had raised 5 children mostly on her own and never let anyone tell her what she couldn't do. I wanted my daughter to carry that energy with her through her life. I wanted her to know that she came from women who didn't give up. The medical board's final decision came 6 weeks after Eleanor was born, while I was still deep in the haze of new motherhood and sleep deprivation. Patricia Kowalski called me personally to deliver the news. The board had completed their investigation and found substantial evidence that Dr. Mercer had violated professional standards in her treatment of multiple patients. They were suspending her medical license for 2 years and requiring her to complete extensive remediation training before she could apply for reinstatement. They were also referring the case to the State Attorney General's office for potential criminal charges related to the falsified medical records. It wasn't everything I had wanted. She wasn't losing her license permanently. But it was more than I had expected, and Patricia said it was one of the strongest actions she had seen the board take in her 15 years as an investigator. The pattern of complaints had made the difference. One woman's word against a doctor's might have gone nowhere. 5 women together were impossible to dismiss. The civil lawsuit settled 3 months later for an amount I'm not allowed to disclose due to the confidentiality agreement, but I can say it was substantial enough to change my family's financial situation significantly. More importantly, the settlement required Lakewood Women's Health to implement comprehensive policy changes around patient treatment and complaint handling. They had to create an independent patient advocate position, establish mandatory bias training for all providers, and develop clearer reporting procedures for complaints about discriminatory treatment. Dr. Newberry resigned as medical director, and Dr. Mercer's practice privileges were permanently revoked from the entire Lakewood healthcare system. She could never work there again, even if she got her license back. Franklin told me this was a better outcome than most cases achieved. Usually, practices just paid money and went back to business as usual. The structural changes we had forced would protect patients for years to come. Dr. Mercer's suspension was covered by local media, which led to even more women coming forward with stories about their experiences at Lakewood Women's Health. A reporter from the regional news station interviewed me for a segment about age discrimination in reproductive health care. I sat in my living room with Eleanor sleeping in a bassinet just off camera and talked about what had happened to me. I talked about the word selfish and the falsified records and the months of fighting to be believed. I talked about the other women who had joined the lawsuit and how we had supported each other through the process. And I talked about my daughter, this miracle baby who existed despite everything, who was healthy and thriving and the absolute best thing that had ever happened to me. The segment aired on a Monday evening, and by Wednesday morning it had been picked up by national outlets. Suddenly, I was getting messages from women all over the country who had experienced similar treatment from their doctors. Some were sharing their stories for the first time. Others were asking for advice on how to file complaints or find attorneys. I tried to respond to as many as I could. The state attorney general's office announced charges against Dr. Mercer 8 months after the medical board's decision. She was charged with multiple counts of falsifying medical records, which was a felony in our state, as well as fraud related to insurance billing for services that were documented inaccurately. The criminal case took another year to work through the system, during which Eleanor learned to crawl, then walk, then say mama and dada. Dr. Mercer eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges as part of a deal that spared her prison time, but resulted in permanent revocation of her medical license and a substantial fine. She would never practice medicine again, anywhere. That was the outcome that mattered most to me. Not the money from the settlement, though that certainly helped. Not the media coverage, though that raised awareness. The fact that she could never do this to another woman was the justice I had wanted from the beginning. Eleanor is 3 years old now, a tornado of energy and opinions who has very strong feelings about which shoes she wears and which books get read at bedtime. She has no idea what her mother went through to bring her into this world, and she won't for many years. I'm still connected with some of the other women from the lawsuit. We have a group chat where we share updates about our lives and occasionally vent about the lingering trauma of what we experienced. 2 of us are in therapy for what we went through. One moved to a different city because she couldn't stand being near Lakewood Women's Health anymore. We all carry scars, but we also carry the knowledge that we changed things. We made it harder for the next Dr. Mercer to operate unchecked. We gave voice to a problem that so many women experience in silence. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't fought back. If I had just changed doctors and moved on with my life without filing complaints or joining lawsuits or talking to reporters. Dr. Mercer would still be practicing. She would still be telling women they were selfish or delusional or too old to deserve motherhood. The other women in the lawsuit might never have come forward. The policy changes at Lakewood would never have happened. One person deciding to speak up created a chain reaction that protected thousands of future patients. I didn't know that would happen when I started. I just knew that what had been done to me was wrong and that I couldn't let it go unanswered. Every time Eleanor does something new, learns a new word, or masters a new skill, I think about how close I came to having her taken from me. Not physically, but emotionally. Dr. Mercer tried to make me feel like I didn't deserve to be a mother, like my daughter shouldn't exist. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about everything. My daughter's 3rd birthday party was last month, a chaotic celebration in our backyard with 12 toddlers, too much cake, and a bouncy house that I will never fully forgive my husband for renting. Eleanor wore a princess dress and got frosting in her hair and declared it the best day ever. Watching her run around with her friends, completely oblivious to everything her parents had gone through, I felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for years. It was peace. Not the absence of memory, because I will never forget what happened in that ultrasound room, but the presence of something stronger. The knowledge that I had protected my daughter before she was even born, that I had fought for her right to exist, and that nothing Dr. Mercer said could ever change the fact that she was here, she was healthy, and she was loved. That was the real ending of this story. Not the lawsuit or the license revocation or the media coverage. This little girl with her father's eyes and her grandmother's stubbornness, smashing cake into her mouth and laughing at the top of her lungs. Dr. Mercer told me I was selfish for wanting her. I look at Eleanor now and I know the truth. The only selfish thing would have been giving up. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.